Hi, my name is Charles Key. I've represented House District 90 since 1986. The purpose of this production is not to make any political statements. The purpose of this production is to give the simple truth to the American people about what happened April 19, 1995. The opinions and the conclusions of the witnesses are simply their own. They don't necessarily represent mine or anyone else involved in this production.
Oklahoma City is probably much like the town you live in. We're not really famous for anything. We're just people like you and your neighbors. But all that changed at 9:02 a.m. on April 19th, 1995. Now we're famous. We're famous for the deadliest terror attack in United States history.
Just as people tend to remember major historic events, Oklahomans will always remember where they were the morning of April 19th, 1995. I was in my office that morning, which is about 5 miles from downtown Oklahoma City. And just like most residents of Oklahoma City, I felt and heard the explosions at the Murrah Federal Building. In the days and weeks following that tragic morning, I began to have serious questions about the government's official explanation. For example, the reported size of the bomb was upgraded several times. Also, the many reports of explosive devices found in the building was continuously discounted. Another question was about John Doe number 2 and how the importance and status of John Doe number 2 was continuously changed throughout the course of the investigation. Another reason for my questioning was the analysis done by General Benton Parton and also many other experts in areas such as chemistry, explosives, seismology, and demolition. At that point, I began to consider how I could get the facts of this case to the American people. My first course of action was to call on the Speaker of the Oklahoma House of Representatives to form a special committee. The purpose of that committee would be to act as an oversight committee in a function much like the many checks and balances that we have at various levels of our government. Unfortunately, that request was denied by the Speaker, and he and the Governor both were very critical of that request, saying that people need to have more faith and trust in their federal government and its agencies. Frankly, that goes against what I believe an elected official's responsibility is to his constituents and the American people. I began looking into alternative methods of communication. In this production and documentary, what we do is offer you eyewitnesses and experts and let you draw your own conclusion about what really took place in Oklahoma City on April the 19th.
The rescue workers found two kinds of people at the Alfred P. Murrah Building on April 19th. They were survivors and recoveries.
This is the area that on the first day we called the cave. Everything ended up with nicknames of different parts of the structure. Some of it's depending upon what we found at the time when we first crawled in, with the people that were surviving, calling for help, versus the ones who weren't able to and deceased. Anyway, we called this area the cave. There was rubble where this is at. That was the only access. And this goes back quite a ways. I'll take you around to the other side. You can get only an idea. And what we're standing in right now is about 3 foot of rubble. So you're looking in, you're crawling downhill to go underneath these beams. Men were turning on their backs, taking off their helmets, sliding in, and putting all their gear back on, and then moving rocks and just crawling. A lot of recoveries were taken out here. About 18 behind this wall. And many of them were literally impaled together. Now, just the other side of this and down, we had 2 survivors the first day. Halfway through, myself and the people from a mutual aid company was behind the rubble, and the 2 survivors here, we had the first bomb scare. Myself and some of the people from mutual aid was back in there, and then we had to leave the area. They asked us not to leave them, and it was real trying on most of the men that were in this area. We had 3 survivors, and all 3 begged you not to leave. You prayed. You just asked them not to be back.
Tony and Earl Garrett are 2 Oklahomans directly affected by April 19, 1995. On that day, along with many other citizens, Tony, a registered nurse, volunteered to assist the victims at the Murrah Federal Building. Tony was assigned to ID tag those victims who were already dead. Tony tagged over 120 victims.
One baby bother in particular, it had been blown around a pole, and she had to literally remove it from the pole to get it out of the way. And it still bothers her. She acts like she's callous, but she's not. She just blocks a lot of it out.
But something that really upsets me is knowing that the day before, or maybe minutes before that bombing, were the bodies of the babies and the children, and the makeshift morgue was once a playground where those children used to play.
Government officials claimed that there was only 1 bomb, yet the building was evacuated several times in the first few hours.
There was a period when we were bringing the bodies to the playground, and that's when we had notice that we needed to evacuate the building because there was another bomb. They had found another bomb. There was at least 4 other people that had told me that there was a bomb inside the building.
And these 4 other people, were they part of the rescue effort?
Yes.
All of them?
And there was a couple of people that had actually seen them remove the bomb when the bomb squad had come down to the Murrah building.
Would you describe what they said that this particular bomb looked like?
They really didn't go into detail.
Because
I didn't ask for details because I wouldn't have known what they meant.
Did you say something to me on the initial interview that these people said that there was a timing device or something?
There was a timing device on one of the bomb that they had secured earlier that morning that had been set to go off 10 minutes after the bombs had gone off that morning, which they assumed that the mechanism of the bomb malfunctioned because of the blast. So that's what caused that bomb not to explode.
I see. Did this person tell you it was definitely an active bomb, or did any of these people tell you it was actually definitely an active bomb?
Yes.
They did? Okay. So then they defused the bomb? Is that basically what they did? I guess the bomb squad did that.
The bomb squad took it off.
Okay.
Glenn Wilburn is one of the many Oklahomans who lost family to the tragedy. Glenn's 2 infant grandsons were killed by the blast.
I've got a lot of questions about it. I also have questions about explosives in the building. I have talked to an investigator that has taped interviews with civilian employees that worked in the building almost immediately after the blast. And they tell of explosives that ATF had stored in that building and that were carried out by ATF several times in the days following the explosion. In fact, we've been told that the first bomb scare was not in fact a bomb scare. It was designed that way to get the civilians back and all personnel back, and ATF went in there to get their files and also to take explosives out that they had illegally stored in their munitions on the night floor. Once again, if that's true, we've got a serious problem there because we have munitions, explosives, not munitions, but explosives being stored illegally in a public federal building.
J.D. Cash, an investigative reporter from southeastern Oklahoma, has interviewed thoroughly over 100 witnesses, victims, and rescue workers.
Following that initial interview with Dr. Brown back on the 1st of May, I talked to Dick Miller, who's the assistant fire marshal for the Oklahoma City Fire Marshal's office. And he, in very clear terms, readily admitted that there were explosives removed from the Murrah building immediately after the disaster on the very same morning. And it was those explosions, it was those devices that were removed from the Murrah building which caused the evacuation of the rescue workers on at least 3 different occasions. And it's important for people to understand that while they are in the process of removing these explosives, people are left bleeding to death and dying. This was a very real situation. I know now, as we have all heard since, that the new story that comes out from the ATF and the FBI is that these were nothing but training devices. Most absolutely ludicrous excuse that if anyone believes that, they're overlooking the very simple and obvious fact that experts went into that building, experts removed police, fire, and civilian rescuers and moved them blocks away while they endeavored to remove all of these explosive devices. Dick Miller told me that the 1030, we'll call it bomb scare, was related to a 2 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot box marked high explosives. In a subsequent interview with another reporter, he explained that he watched the bomb squad haul that off, load that up and haul it off, and what it was percussion caps. And these are percussion caps that are used for C4. I have speculated early that the ATF, Secret Service, and DEA was likely storing explosives illegally in the building in their arsenal rooms. Sure enough, as time goes by, witnesses come forward, I have discovered that indeed the DEA and the ATF had arsenal rooms on the 9th floor. I have obtained photographs of the ATF arsenal room. I have 4 different live witnesses on tape who have said that they watched the ATF unload their arsenal room 2 weeks after the blast. They helped them load different devices, firearms of every firearm known to man, hundreds of thousands of rounds of ammunition, explosives, boxes marked explosives, tow missiles, hand grenades, just about everything short of a T-72 Russian tank was in that building. But the most important thing is that they were storing devices that were high explosives that did not belong in a public building.
April the 19th was the 2nd year anniversary of the Waco incident. Was this a significant date for the ATF? Did they have prior knowledge of a bomb threat? How many of them were in the Alfred P. Murrah Building at the time of the explosion? Pat Briley, a freelance writer from Edmond, Oklahoma, has gathered numerous journalistic accounts of the bombing in Oklahoma City.
The U.S. Marshals in March of '95, March 22nd, were put on full heightened alert nationwide at all federal buildings and all federal courthouses by their director, Mr. Gonzalez, because they had received threats that they considered credible enough to consume the manpower of the U.S. Marshals nationwide to be on the lookout for bombings by Arab terrorist fundamentalists in retaliation over the World Trade Center bombing trial. This alert was had to be approved by Janet Reno, who is over the U.S. Marshals, and the intelligence that led to that alert had to be available to her as well. And we can't imagine that if U.S. Marshals had put everybody on alert like that within their forces, that the FBI and the ATF didn't know about it.
And this was covered in the
Right.
ledger.
This alert that I'm referring to was reported at length. And this memo, there was a memo on this as well issued by the U.S. Marshals, and it was quoted at length in an article in the Star-Ledger newspaper.
The New Jersey Star-Ledger reported that United States law enforcement authorities obtained information that Islamic terrorists could have been planning suicide attacks against federal courthouses and government installations in the United States. The disclosure was made in a confidential memorandum issued by the United States Marshals Service in Washington, which called for stepped-up security at federal facilities throughout the nation.
As citizens of the United States, we have a right to know what's going on in our world. If we'd have known, I have talked to several people that they had had bomb threats for 2 weeks prior to this bomb. The FBI and the ATF knew that these bomb threats were real, and they did nothing about it.
Michael Hinton, a resident of the YMCA building across from the Murrah Building, could have been another tragic victim had he not rushed to catch a bus a few blocks from the blast.
And looking out my window in the afternoon, it's about between 1:30 and 2 o'clock, I noticed a large gathering of people outside the building. Well, it's about 200 to 300 people. And when I looked at these folks, I said, well, what could be going on at the Federal Building?
Right. Did you think that this could have been a bomb threat or a fire drill?
Initially, there was several questions came to my mind what it could have been, but at that time, like I said, I had no idea.
Did you notice any extra precautions being taken at the Federal Building during the week on or before the day of the bombing?
An interesting observation I did notice, on the morning of the bomb explosion, the TV networks locally were carrying the statement that the Federal Building had received a bomb threat 1 week prior to that morning of the bomb explosion. So in my mind, when I heard that, I'm saying, well, what I observed 1 week earlier out my window, could that have been what was going on then? And then the next question came, if so, what security precautions had been taken if they knew this?
Do you know anything about prior bomb threats at the Federal Building?
Well, that's a pretty interesting question. The day of the bombing on April the 19th, when we finally ended up at Children's Hospital, where we were waiting to hear news about our grandsons, Chase and Colton, I had two separate people come up to me. There was a waiting room where all the parents and relatives were waiting, and they put their arms on my shoulder and they asked me, they said, did you know they had a bomb threat in the building last week? And each time, or the first time, I asked my wife, who was standing close to me, if she had heard about that, which she hadn't, and she asked our daughter Edie, and she didn't know anything about it. And at the time, you know, I just it slipped on out of my, I didn't think any more about it a great deal. And then as a few days went by, we started hearing more talk about bomb threats that the Federal Building had had in the week before, and even the morning before, and even the day before. It became almost indistinguishable. Did they have bomb threats the week before, the day before, or did they have them all, a week before and the day before? And one interesting thing that grew out of that is that I heard a rumor that a gentleman whose wife was in the building and had fallen 3 or 4 stories into the basement area had ran up to an ATF agent the morning of the bombing. He was looking for his wife frantically, and he found an agent, and he grabbed this agent and asked him, you know, what's going on here? You know, can you help me? I need to find an agent that knows my wife and can find her for me. And the agent told him, said, well, that's going to be difficult to do, because they received a call this morning, most of the agents did, that there was something going on today and they didn't need to come in. So I don't know if, I'm assuming that maybe that call was prompted by a bomb threat, who knows. You know, we've also been told that by 2 different witnesses, we have been told that the bomb squad was in front of the federal courthouse, that building, that morning at 7:30, and that they had already cleared the Murrah building. So there was something strange and unusual going on that morning, because we got a bomb squad down there clearing buildings before 7:30 in the morning, and then we have this rumor, which I subsequently confirmed, and I spoke with the gentleman regarding what the ATF agent said. That's not just a rumor. I've spoken with the man, and that did happen.
Is there a Middle Eastern connection that is not being pursued by federal investigators? The very existence of John Doe II has been denied despite eyewitness accounts of his presence in Kansas and in Oklahoma City on the day of the bombing with Timothy McVeigh in the Ryder truck.
From the very beginning, we have what probably is the most massive manhunt in our nation's history for John Doe number 2. And that lasts for a week, maybe 2 weeks, and then all of a sudden the FBI comes back and says there was not really a John Doe number 2, that it was Mr. Bunning came into Elliott's shop maybe 24 hours after McVeigh rented the truck, and that everybody's just confused. Well, if everybody's just confused, we've got a lot of confused people. We not only have Mr. Elliott, who still maintains privately to his friends that there was a John Doe number 2, and that there was not only one more person with McVeigh when he rented the truck that day, but there probably was 2. And that it wasn't 24 hours later, it wasn't 24 hours before. It was the morning that McVeigh rented the truck. And Mr. Elliott's not going public. He won't talk to anyone in the press, but this is what he's telling his friends, that it doesn't matter what the FBI says, there was a John Doe number 2 there. Now we have, in Oklahoma City, we have McVeigh stopping at a tire shop at 10th and Hudson the morning of the bombing, about 20 minutes till 9, getting out of the Ryder truck, walking over to a young man and asking him for directions to 5th and Harvey. The young man tells him the directions, and then McVeigh gets back in the Ryder truck. I've talked with this young man as recently as this morning, and he tells me he's standing no more than 8 feet from the truck, and he sees John Doe number 2 sitting in the passenger side of the Ryder truck at 20 minutes till 9, and he sees McVeigh sitting there in the truck who he just spoke with. He indicates to me that this John Doe number 2 could possibly be a Middle Eastern looking type man with a baseball cap on. And this is what he had told the FBI immediately after the bombing.
The morning of April 19th, I was working at Johnny's Tire Store. At about approximately 8:25, a Ryder truck pulled up into my place of business. At that time, a gentleman asked me for directions to 5th and Harvey. I proceeded to explain the location of where he was asking me. He seemed to be a little concerned of where I was telling him about. At that time, the gentleman, Timothy McVeigh, stepped out of the truck. I walked him over to, let's say, 10, 11 feet away from the truck itself. I pointed a direction downtown, which is to my right. He seemed to acknowledge where I was talking about. At that time, the gentleman walked back to the truck. I talked to him. I also noticed there was a passenger in the truck at that time. From that point in time, the Ryder's truck seemed to stay there about another 5 minutes and headed the direction I explained to where he was at.
What did the person in the truck look like?
The person in the truck looked to more be of a Caucasian, Middle Eastern, was not an African American, he was not a real light complected. He was not blonde hair, light skinned. He, at that time, like I said, they didn't stay very much longer.
Was he wearing a cap?
Yes, also, he was wearing a ball cap. Timothy McVeigh had his on backwards, which, just like this. It was on his head. The other gentleman had his on like this. They really didn't acknowledge me so much. They didn't really seem that they were that concerned. They didn't seem nervous. They seemed to be more lost. They came in from the west. They pulled into our business kind of a catty-corner angle. From there, they proceeded right to go south downtown area.
How far is Johnny's Tire Company from the Murrah Building?
I'm located on 10th and Hudson. The bombing took place on 5th and Harvey. That would seem 1 block over, 5 blocks down. I'm to the north side of the bombing. 4 days after the bombing, or 3 days after the bombing, the government took me downtown to identify the gentleman. Under what I can understand, I did identify the gentleman as being Timothy McVeigh.
Did they have the passenger, which was with McVeigh, was he in a lineup also?
No, he was not. At that time, I've never even actually seen, at that time, before the John Doe actually 2 number come out, I'd never even seen a photo, a sketch, nothing like that. And also, when I did identify Timothy McVeigh, I had not even seen him. The only way I'd ever seen him was through a sketch on a paper at Daily, Oklahoma.
What's your motivation for telling the American people what you have right now? Are you in this for money?
I'm not in this for anything but to let people know that this is what I've seen. I feel at this point in time that I will, or should I say I might be a witness in the bombing itself, but as far as me actually being motivated for any other reason, I have none. I just want to let people understand this is what I've seen that day. You know, and then nothing's going to change my mind whether I testify or not. This is what I've seen that day.
Oklahomans have been affected by this terrible tragedy. 169 people lost their lives. We feel compelled to bring this information to the American people.
This is a perfect example of a very credible witness. He was extremely reluctant to even sit down and give me an interview for a book. At the time that I contacted him, he did not realize that I knew what he already knew, or that I had an inkling about what he knew. This individual had gone outside of the building to smoke his pipe at approximately, let's say 15 or 20 minutes until 9 o'clock that morning. He was working in a building, the Journal Record Building, which is directly north of the Murrah Building, less than 100 yards from the front door, from the door of the Murrah Building. As he's out there, he notices a yellow Mercury parked up against what they call the Athenaeum Building, and it is it's facing him off slightly to his right, with one individual in the vehicle. That only reason that he remembers that is that you don't park there. The parking is spread out in front of him. That's where you're supposed to park in the authorized spaces, and this car's illegally parked. He then remembers it's Wednesday, it's laundry day, he's a blue-collar guy, he's a pressman. He's supposed to turn his dirty uniforms in from last week for clean uniforms on Wednesday. So he takes off to the west down an alley and goes around the corner to his pickup truck, gets his laundry, and is on his way back to the area where he was smoking his pipe. And at that moment, he looks up and sees the yellow Mercury, and now there are 2 men in it, and it is racing towards him. When it gets within just a few feet of him, it makes a sharp swerve turn to the right, and it jumps a couple of curb guards. And at that time, as it's swerving in front of him, he sees the man that he later identifies as Timothy McVeigh, and the olive-complected Middle Eastern man with a ball cap on, that he says is a perfect description of what the FBI sketch is. In fact, he says he helped the FBI with their composite. The car jumps the curb guards, and as it does, and it is racing away, he's watching this vehicle very closely because it is almost running down. And he sees a license plate, and it is not an Arizona plate. It's a white Oklahoma plate dangling by one bolt. He, of course, is struck by that because it is about to fall off, and so this settles into his memory. He then goes inside the building, goes back to work, and within just minutes, maybe 2 or 3, 4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, it's hard to say, it's hard for him to remember, but a very short period of time later, there's the blast. He is in a semi-protected area where he is, and he does survive the blast with minor injuries. He helps some people. He put out a small fire. Then he goes out the west side of the building, joins his co-workers, the rest of them that are pouring out of the building. Many of these people are seriously injured. Immediately, as he joins the circle of workers, he looks over just a few feet away, and in the middle of all this chaos and blood and crying and screaming, here is another Middle Eastern person standing there staring at the Murrah building with a smile on from ear to ear. He said it was the most chilling thing that he's ever seen in his whole thing, in spite of all the injuries. As he looks back over it, it is spooky, it's chilling, it's sickening. But he said the man was almost in rapture over what he was looking at. And after having interviewed 40 or 50 people that were in that building and injured that day, and all their experiences around there, believe me, there wasn't a single soul in downtown Oklahoma City that morning that was smiling, except for this individual.
Representative Key, you're a 5-term state representative. You won your last election with 73% of the vote. Why jeopardize your political career?
Well, Chuck, when I took a look at this and saw what I believe were serious inconsistencies, I couldn't look the other way. I felt like I had to take some kind of action. And being elected to the Oklahoma legislature has been one of the greatest honors and experiences of my life. But I felt like I had an obligation to those people that elected me and to the American people. And when I look at what so many other people have done for this country, made sacrifices, I believe the risk was worth it and had to be taken.
As you know, the government has a few experts of their own. And some of these experts say that an ammonium nitrate truck bomb could do the type of damage that it did to the Murrah building. As a matter of fact, they use the Lebanon truck bombing incident as an example.
Well, there's many experts that say that that's just not possible, that an ammonium nitrate diesel fuel bomb placed where it was could have done that much damage. And the real point about the Lebanon truck bomb and other examples like that is simply that that Lebanon truck bomb was driven into that building underneath it. And it's important to note also that that building was about half the size of the Murrah Federal Building. And the columns, for example, were much smaller. So they had the advantage of the truck going up underneath inside the building, which wasn't the case here in Oklahoma City. And they had a structure that was much more vulnerable to being destroyed by an impact, like a bomb like that.
We, the citizens, pay the federal agencies to investigate matters such as this. Why not allow them to do their job?
Well, we should allow them to do the job, and we're doing that. And what we've asked for is not an investigation or a committee that will impede or interfere with their own investigation. What we've asked for is an oversight committee which will deal with the issues that they've already made public as far as their official explanation that are in question.
We were setting up a triage unit a couple of blocks from the Murrah building, and it wasn't until later that we had they had asked if there was anybody that wanted to bag the bodies, and there was myself, a student nurse, and I now know there was a physician that agreed to do it. There's 3 of us that agreed to do it. And we had gone around and started looking for bodies. The first body that we came on was a young female that had been found in front of the World Resources Building. And she had been blown to pieces. Her body was charred. And she was pregnant.
You're saying part of her head was missing or something?
Her head was gone. The only thing that was left of her head was her chin. Her arms were missing. Her right leg was missing, and the flesh from her left leg was partially missing. And the only place we were able to tag her was the bone to her left leg, lower portion. When we went over to the south part of the building, I had noticed several citizens, police officers, and firemen that were trying to dig at the rubble, trying to get the people out. And on the upper floors, there was people that were sitting at their desks that when you first looked at them, you really didn't know that they were dead. But when you got a closer look, you saw that there was no way they can be sitting there alive with metal fragments through their bodies. There were just people sitting at their desks just waiting for somebody to come and get them, it's what it seemed like. But there was people that were blown out of the windows.
Oklahoma State Representative Charles Key held a press conference at the Oklahoma Capitol. Several witnesses and experts were available for questions. Key expert at the conference was recently retired Brigadier General Benton Parton. General Parton was one of the top ballistics experts in the United States Air Force. He retired from the Air Force with 31 years of service.
And I spent 31 years in the Air Force. 25 years of that was in research and development and weapons. I went through extensive training, technical training, in the weapons area and all the associated technologies. I started off working in the ballistic research laboratories, building warheads, testing them against all kinds of targets. And I served in the Air Force Systems Command level twice, Air Staff level twice, and in the Office of the Secretary of Defense in this particular area. And I was the first chairman of the Air Munitions Requirements and Development Committee, which harmonized the requirements for the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps. It's a perfect suited job, and I had a 06 level from each of the services, and we were under all of the air weapons that all four services used. When I saw the damage to the building, and with my knowledge of explosives, demolitions, and what you can do and what you can't do with explosives, I had a problem, a big problem, very quickly. You can't destroy hard targets with blast. It just doesn't work. And reinforced columns in a building are hard targets. And I spent much of my career working on precision-guided weapons because I knew what you could do and what you can't do with explosives against hard targets. A 24-inch reinforced concrete column is a hard target. It's a very hard target. Now I got all the information I could about the structure of the building, the columns, the layout, and the supposed position of the truck bomb. And I made a layout, and I did some analysis to determine how realistic it was to have brought down the columns and the pattern it was brought down. Can everyone see this with their cameras? At first, when I did this, I was concerned, and I was preparing a report and a letter to go to the Senate and the House because I felt somebody needed to take an independent investigation because what was coming out of Oklahoma was not consistent with reality. It just was not consistent with reality. I distributed a letter to about 25 senators and 35 congressmen. There were 58, I think, total letters that I hand-delivered to all those offices, and trying to get them to take some initiative action to see that the proper forensic investigation was done by an independent body before that building was brought down. And at that particular time, it was some question about the precise location of the column, about the truck bomb. I said, well, if it was the truck bomb that did the damage, it would have had to have been located somewhere adjacent to this column, which I labeled A3. There are 13 columns in each row, and it's 3D, and I labeled the columns, this row A, this row B, this row C, and column A1 through 11 to the other side. Actually, the truck bomb was just beyond A4 over at this point, but the reach into the building the building is really relatively symmetrical here with respect to damage and vulnerability. So you would expect symmetry with respect to detonation and with respect to the damage and the detonation. Now, with the truck bomb over here, and I stated in the letter to the Senate and the House, I said if it was the truck bomb that did the damage in row B, column row B, then the maximum reach would have been relatively adjacent to B. Because if you look at the circles, they're pretty flat reaching back here. That's the constant level of pressure, roughly the constant level of pressure. And you see that they're not too different between B2, B3, and B4. So you'd have to consider it marginal if, in fact, that column was brought down by the truck. But when you move the bomb over here to beyond A4, where the center of the crater is, then you would have had to have brought down, the maximum reach of that would have been here at B4 or B5, and it should have brought B4 down to B5 and on B3. And because of the steep gradient in pressure, you have a big, big difference between the impulse that column B3 saw and column B4 or B5. You don't need to go any further than that. That's ipso facto evidence that column B3 had to have had a demolition charge on it. There's just no other explanation.
The laws of physics, coupled with a lifetime of experience with explosives and munitions, convinced General Parton that the magnitude and the pattern of the damage done to the Murrah building were totally inconsistent with a single truck bomb, especially one detonated outside of the building. When I first saw the pictures of the truck bomb's asymmetrical damage to the federal building, General Parton said, my immediate reaction was that the pattern of damage would have been technically impossible without supplementing demolition charges at some of the reinforced concrete column bases, a standard demolition technique. Could there have been more than one explosion? Let's go to Sarkey's Energy Center at the University of Oklahoma and hear Dr. Brown's explanation of the seismographic evidence which was recorded on April 19th.
On the day of the April 19th explosion, there were two seismograms recorded that are thought to be associated with the explosion. One of these was at the Omniplex Museum. It's shown here with the abbreviation OMO, for Omniplex, Oklahoma, is the indication. That instrument was 4 miles to the northeast. The second seismogram was recorded at station FNO, or Franklin Norman, near the University of Oklahoma campus, and is run by the Oklahoma Geological Survey. That instrument is a little over 16 miles to the southeast. Those two instruments then gave us an indication and a measure of what was happening during the explosion. But the understanding of the various signals that were arriving was not very clear. And so during the demolition of the Murrah building, additional study was conducted in collaboration with the U.S. Geological Survey. We put one of their instruments next to our instrument in Norman. We put one of their instruments next to the seismometer at the Omniplex. We put an additional one of their instruments at a Baptist church, a Southern Baptist church on 89th Street. And finally, we went right on the demolition site and put our nearest instrument behind the danger camera that was used by the news media. So we have a great deal of control, and the beauty of that demolition study is that it allowed us to watch the signals develop as they go 4, 8 miles, 16 miles, so we could literally watch the signal evolve as it moved away from the Murrah building site and arrived at the Norman site. Important signals to note on the day of the explosion are the dominant ground wave and the air blast signal. This dominant ground wave, which lasted for a period of 10 seconds, is an approximate measure of the length of time the Murrah building was vibrating. The ground was actually in movement for slightly less than this 10 seconds of duration observed at the Omniplex. The air blast is a measure of the length of time the truck bomb was active, and that tells us that a portion of the ground movement at the Omniplex was not caused by or directly related to the truck bomb. The demolition study, especially the seismogram at the Baptist Church, showed us that the signal this dominant ground wave begins to break up as it travels away from the site of the Murrah building and finally arrives in the form of two basic Rayleigh wave signals observed at Norman. This is a phenomenon called surface wave dispersion, in which low frequencies travel faster than the high frequencies, and the part of the buildup of this second signal, it may be attributed to a phenomenon that's called an Airy phase, A-I-R-Y, Airy, after the gentleman who discovered the idea. So that this observation of two signals is indeed related to a single, apparently continuous episode of seismic activity at the Murrah building, as suggested in a previous USGS press release. However, the discrepancy between the length of time the air blast was in action tells us that this first period represents a time when the truck was actually exploding. And the second period then is a period of time in which additional vibration was taking place that is not explained by the truck bomb. Now, here I've drawn a cartoon picture of two people close to a floor. One of them yells hello, and the other is listening with one ear to the floor and one ear up. And what he should hear coming through the ground is the word hello, and what he should hear coming through the air later, because the speed of sound in air is slower, is the word hello. And in terms of drawing that out as a seismogram, you would draw a seismogram, and here the first arrival would be the ground wave GW, which comes in the form of the word hello, and then the later arrival, the air wave, comes in and says the word hello. The signals received at the Omniplex are not that way. The ground wave comes through and says, hello, how are you? Whereas the air blast only says hello. This is a cartoon illustration of the basic idea used, but the extra time of ground motion at the Murrah building is clearly indicated by the discrepancy between these two signals.
April the 19th was the second year anniversary of the Waco incident. Was this a significant date for the ATF? Did they have prior knowledge of a bomb threat? How many of them were in the Alfred P. Murrah building at the time of the explosion?
I had asked them if, based on my knowledge subsequent to the explosion of April 19th, it never occurred to them before the bombing that April 19th was a day that they needed to pay attention and be on alert and be on guard. And of course, the two agents in my house, Luke Franny and Mr. Collar, both said no, said it never occurred to them, said, not an inkling of problems. Well, that was real interesting because 2 hours later, this meeting took place at my home about 10 o'clock that morning. It was over with by about 10. Well, it was at 9 o'clock. It was over with by no later than 9:45, 9:30. 2 hours later, I turn on TV on CNN at 12 o'clock noon, and I see Mr. Beerball of CNN interviewing John McGaugh, the head of ATF in Washington, D.C. And now he asked Mr. Beerball asked John McGaugh the exact same question I had asked in my living room 2 hours earlier. His question was, quote, Mr. McGaugh, based on the significance of April the 19th, did your agency take any precautions for that day? And this was real interesting because Mr. McGaugh's response was, yes, we were aware of the significance of April the 19th, and we took precautions at all of our offices across the country, unquote. Somebody was not being honest that morning, either the people in my living room or Mr. McGaugh, because those same two questions got two different answers.
In those articles, in those newsletters that they put out, those bulletins, they state that their agent in charge, an Alex McCauley, was in the building at the time of the blast and was riding down the elevator when the blast occurred. And they say this is a well-documented fact that he and an unnamed DEA agent, and we now know who that agent is, free fell from the 8th floor to the 3rd floor. Well, I think then the bulletins go on to say that he managed to work his way out of the elevator and then saved a number of people. If you just stop right there and think about it, if you drop 50 feet, chances are both of those individuals' ankles would be broken. If anybody doubts that, crawl up to a 5-story building, jump off, and just see how you feel. Now, it's an absurd cover story, and I'm sure they now regret it. But they're going to regret it a lot more for the simple fact that they didn't realize that there was 2 elevator repairmen directly across the street in the Federal Building waiting for a GSA inspector, because that was the very day that they were to have a safety inspection on those elevators. There were also 2 other elevator repairmen within 3 minutes of that site. They of course heard the blast, and on their way downtown got a radio message, and then another half a dozen of their co-workers for the same company were radioed, and so they all converged, and within 10 minutes they're all inside that building checking those elevators. So anywhere from 3 to 10 minutes passes, and you have anywhere from 6 to 10 men checking those 6 elevators plus a freight elevator. The bottom line is this, and after weeks of interviews with all of these different people, the bottom line is this: no elevator free fell that day. The only way you can make a modern elevator free fall is to cut the cables, and certainly none of the cables were cut. 5 of the 6 elevators were locked between floors because the doors were blown open, the power was cut off, so it froze the elevators exactly where they were. Once an elevator is in that situation, you can't open those doors. All of the elevators had to be accessed from the ceilings of the elevators, period. There is no way that any ATF agent or any other person was on those elevators that day. They weren't there, and no one else was there, period. So why is Alex McCauley telling this lie? I suspect it's because he's been told that somebody has to be in that building from ATF that day, because it looks pretty suspicious when the whole staff is gone. They had a secretary, 1 field agent, and 2 clerical people in there, and that leaves 11 agents unaccounted for, out loose, doing something.
What was the attitude of the government officials at the scene of the bombing?
Well, that evening, we had gone down to a triage center that they had set up at the, where was it?
It's up on 5th in Oklahoma. It was a building up there owned by the Oklahoma Publishing Company, I believe.
And we had gone down there, and they had a TV there where the news media was talking about it. And I was upset about the fact that they were not giving the true body count. And one of the ladies from TBN
Trinity Broadcast,
had come up to me and asked me if I knew anything about the bombing or if I had been down there, and I told her I had been down there all morning or all day. And she asked me what I saw while I was down there and what my opinion was of the bombing. And I told her that I was highly upset because the news media and the information that they were given was not the accurate information that they were giving out to the people.
In what way was it not accurate?
That there was more bodies than what they were saying on the news media and releasing at the time. And I told her that I was very distressed over that because I felt like the public has a right to know exactly what took place up there. And while I was talking to her, I asked her, I was asking her questions about if they can find out and if they can actually report the story the way the story needs to be reported. And while I was sitting there talking, prior to that, when we first got there, they told us that they were waiting for them to find some more bodies. And if they did, that they would bring them, if they were alive, they would bring them to the triage center. And that they had made a makeshift morgue. They had moved it from the church across the street that was also destroyed in the bombing to the building next to this building that they had set up the triage center. And while we were waiting for them to start bringing bodies in, my husband and I went for a walk. And when we got back, prior to us going for a walk, there was several doctors and nurses that had come in to work at the triage center as well. And they were all there trying to get the cot set up and get the IVs set up, and they were just hustling and bustling. Well, when we got back, and the news media had caught me coming into the building, that we were outside before we had entered the building. And that's when I was talking to her. Well, when I entered the building, I noticed that most of the doctors and nurses that were there were no longer there. And we hadn't been gone maybe 20, 30 minutes.
Yeah, just walked a few blocks.
And
it was just a different atmosphere. There was nobody helping anyone. And before, there was people bringing food and medical supplies, everything in. And when we came back in, there was just a cold, callous atmosphere about,
And what do you attribute that to, Earl?
Well, I found out later that the FBI had taken over. And while she was talking to the lady being interviewed on the Trinity Broadcast Network, this gentleman walked up to me and said, do you know her? And I said, yes, she's my wife. He said, well, what's she doing? And I said, well, she's kind of upset because they're trying to keep the body count secret, But I didn't really know why. But I think at the time they said they had 19 people known dead, and my wife and just other people had already tagged over 120 people. And he just kind of turned around and walked away from me then. And I found out later that they were FBI or ATF or whatever, and they had said a few words to her also.
Tony, what was your impression of the FBI, Secret Service, and ATF before and after the bombing?
I really had no dealings with them prior to the bombing. And actually, I haven't had any dealings with them, other than the day of the bombing. I had a friend that worked in the Secret Service Department that was killed in the building. And there was another friend of mine that was killed in the building. And, she was a wonderful person.
They told TBN to shut their cameras off, and these gentlemen were questioning me at the same time Tony was being interviewed. And I saw these two gentlemen walk up to her, and they'd been talking to the ones that were back with me. And he said, asked if I knew her. And I said, yes, she's my wife. And he said, well, what is she? And I said, well, she's been down here all day trying to get people out of this building and help people. And he turned around to his friend and said, well, they need to get her out of here. And that's when she came back and told me that they had told her the FBI was taking over and all of us to get out, and told her to keep her mouth shut.
So if you had to sum up in just a few words, what was the overall attitude for either one of you? What all was the overall attitude of the FBI and ATF?
Well, when they came over to me, he was very pompous and arrogant about asking me who I was.
He was downright rude.
What I was doing there, if I was a civilian, where I worked, what my name was, which I didn't feel like any of that had pertained to what was going on that day or what had happened that day. And he wanted to know just basically everything about me, I would assume. And since I didn't feel that was important, I just told him that I had been down here all day and did what needed to be done, that was needed to be necessarily done. And he said, well, he said, we're down here now, and he said, we're taking over the building, and he said, it would be advisable and recommendable that you keep your mouth shut.
Okay, Earl, how about these 50 cars that you said, approximately 50 cars or so you'd seen?
Well, this was after we had left and started walking around. We were kind of just getting out of the area, you know, just, she wanted to go smoke, and, you know, take a break. And we had been walking down the side streets. I think it was about 6th Street we went up to, because they were on 5th and Oklahoma. And we just looked at the damage. There was damage all the way over on Oklahoma and 6th. The Oklahoma Public Company building had the doors blown out. But the cars started pulling up, and they were all federal agencies. You could tell that they were getting their jackets out, said FBI and ATF and everything. And I think they were wiring in a command center there, because there was phone people and cable companies. But they act like, you know, they were at a drill, you know, like no big deal, just kind of a joking around and all this stuff. And I made a comment to Tony. I said, I can't believe they're here and acting like nothing's even happened, like it's just another drill. And I mean, they act like it was no big deal.
Have people been threatened and told not to talk about what they saw or heard on the day of the bombing?
The civilians have been fairly easy about coming forward and saying, yes, I did see this, and yes, I did see that. The people on the bomb squad, the fire department, the police department, and so forth, when I do get them to talk to me at all, what they simply say is this: I saw a lot that day. I wish I hadn't. I can't talk about it. I have family. I have a job. I've asked them, have you read my articles? And in those cases where they have said yes. And I said, am I wrong? And each and every time they said no. That's why I can't talk about it. I've been threatened. We've been told not to talk about the devices.
Roger A. Raubach, a PhD in physical chemistry with over 30 years' experience, considers General Parton an expert's expert. And he said that he had no reservations in supporting the general's position. According to Raubach, the possibility of a ammonium nitrate fertilizer bomb, regardless of size, demolishing a reinforced concrete structure at a 20 to 30 foot standoff, not only strains the limits of credibility, but exceeds it by a considerable margin.
What was odd is that all the people we found surviving was always against the north wall. I'm not real sure where the tie-in comes. It'd be interesting and to look at that when it's all over and
the wall
find
that the
blast came from.
The side of the building that the nation now has etched in its memories is where you found most of the people.
Most people who survived were along on the back side of that wall. Yeah. The problem is what you're seeing outside is 9 stories stacked. What we saw in the rubbish pile down there when the dog was climbing, that's 2 floors. Well, yeah, 2 floors. Outside that big rubbish pile called the outside pancake, that's all 9 floors stacked on top of each other. I'm not going to see many voids in there, but in here in the furniture, I have lots of opportunities.
Where was the truck with the bomb?
But the plywood covers the crater. So those big sheets of plywood down there cover the crater.
The truck that was parked out in front of the building brought the front of the building down. As you know, that is a cantilevered building. It's a perfect structure for a truck bomb to do the maximum amount of damage to. And if it did, in the explosion, if it did bring down that fascia area and rupture the ATF's arsenal room, and since the ATF was keeping the propellant caps or percussion caps for C4, it is reasonable to assume that they also were keeping C4 there. If a case of C4 fell out of that room during that initial blast, then demolition people, and you can check with anybody who is familiar with C4, they'll tell you C4 is extremely safe to handle. But you can set it off with 3,500 pounds of pressure per square inch. And so if a case of C4 came out of that room, or if C4 was stored in another area of that building, in that southeast area, and if that fascia came down from the explosion outside, which I think we all agree it did, then it builds up on top of 3,500 pounds is nothing when you look at the fascia of that building. Then that would explain that huge amount of destruction on the southeast side. So what we may have had is the government's ineptitude, the ATF overlooking and not following procedures. They may have killed most of the people in that building that day. And certainly, they're not going to be the first ones to admit it.
Well, I was studying that, and looking at my watch, I finally discovered I'd missed 2 buses. So I said, well, I have the option of waiting till 9:05, 9:10, or 9:15, catch another bus. But I was pushed for time to make my connection to get out here in sufficient time to the Capitol. So I run a block away to Northwest 5th and Robinson, and luckily a bus was coming through. It was bus number 2 to be exact. I luckily caught that bus and went to the transfer terminal and got onto bus number 18. Okay, and this was, I guess I would say it was about 8:55, 8:56 when I caught bus number 2. I got to the transfer terminal. No sooner I get off of bus number 2, get on to bus number 18. I'm climbing aboard and just had sat down when I heard this very violent rumble under the bus. It was a pushing type motion. It actually raised that bus up on its side. About 6 or 7 seconds later, another one, which was more violent than the first, pushed the bus again. And I thought that second time the bus was going to turn over.
In discovering where the ATF room was located, sure enough, it turns out that that room was up on the 9th floor, and it runs from north to south on the furthest east side. That room was ruptured. The photographs clearly show that the room was ruptured, and the area that is ruptured is directly over what we now know or call as the pit area. And the pit area is that large coned-in area on the southeast section of the Murrah Building. Now, what's important about that is that's the area where far more than 50% of the fatalities that day occurred.
I had talked to a lady that worked at the Water Resources Building, and she had heard the explosions. And she said that she was upset about the fact when it came over the news media that they were saying there was just one explosion, when she heard 2 explosions that morning.
As stated at the beginning of this film, the opinions and conclusions of these witnesses are their own. Why do they feel it is important for you to know what they saw or heard? What's in it for them? Perhaps it can best be illustrated in their own words.
The only way I can respond to all that and explain why I come forward is that there was one big mistake made that day, that our grandsons were in that building. If it could have been anybody else's kids, middle America that is afraid to step forward, it would have been a lot easier for the feds, for the FBI, and for ATF and everyone, because they probably would keep their mouth shut, but they made a big mistake. Chase and Colton were in that building that day, and until I'm satisfied that everyone has been brought to justice and that all the problems with the ATF having prior knowledge, with them having explosives stored in that building, with the FBI attempting to cover up the true Middle East connection here, until all that comes out, I'm going to take every opportunity I can to step forward on radio, videos, television, and continue talking about it.
Because I don't feel like the people of the United States and America is getting the truth about what happened. I feel that they imploded the building too soon. I feel that they destroyed a lot of evidence that was in the building. The day of the bombing, that evening, they were concerned about gathering evidence, and a few days after that, the way the people had taken over down there, literally working and just scurrying around trying to get people out of there, I feel like they had destroyed the evidence that was outside that they really were looking for. But I don't understand why they imploded the building as early as they did.
I think they blew the building up because they wanted to get rid of the crime scene. And what else do you know that a crime scene is destroyed before they ever go to trial, or before a thorough investigation is done? And to me, it just seems like there's a cloud of doubt over everything the ATF has anything to do with. If there's nothing to hide, why is that cloud of doubt there? Let it be out in the open. Let everybody see what's going on, unless you have something to hide.
It's just hard for me to be down there and see what went on, knowing what went on, and none of it's been portrayed in the media.
I think every American wanted to help with a rescue effort and would have if he could. This is something that I can do, and I feel that every seismologist who has any ability to analyze signals from explosions should take a look at this so that there is a unanimous decision and understanding of what took place on the day of the explosion. There's been a general tendency to force the thinking in one direction or another, and it's very hard as a scientist looking at the data to keep an unbiased opinion, because you are anti-government if you go one way, you're anti-free understanding of what's going on. You're always being pushed to take one side or the other.
Well, as I told someone the other day, my witnesses are telling me one thing, and I've had, after over 100 days of interviewing people, I feel like that I have met a number of very, very good people that are very credible. Their stories check out, and they're telling me one thing in the areas that we've discussed today. The government is telling a completely separate story. Either there was 2 buildings blown up in Oklahoma City that day, or the government is certainly not telling the truth about what happened that day.
I would like to say to the American public this, is that we individually and collectively must get involved in the government process. We must start asking questions. Let us not be so naive as we were in the past. We've learned a lot of lessons since the Kennedy assassination. Let's not be just to accept something just because the media says that this is the way it happened, because there are a lot of kind of underlying questions that have not been answered in this incident, just like with the Kennedy assassination. So we need to get at the truth, and this is what we need to know. It's a matter of accountability. What happened? And it's plain and simple. What is the truth? That's all we want to know. And it's going to be up to us, the people, to band together and unite as a nation to get to the bottom of this. Let's not let another 30 years go by. Let's not, for God's sake, no.
Chuck, I think it's important for people to realize that what they do makes a difference. What every one of us chooses to do will make a difference in the political process. You know, we hear over and over, and we've all said from time to time in the past, that my one vote, or I can't make any difference, just one person. But it really does make a difference. And we all need to be more informed of what our elected officials are doing and what they're not doing. And that's what I would say to the American people. Your input, your involvement makes a difference. When you write or call your state legislator, your U.S. congressman, your U.S. senator, it makes a tremendous difference. And when you do that in an informed way and continue to stay in contact with your elected officials, it makes a tremendous difference. And I would hope that the American people would look seriously at the information that we've provided and look even more deeply into it, do research on their own, and contact their elected officials.
The events which took place on April 19th have taken our innocence. Now we know how vulnerable we are. The 169 victims didn't do anything any differently than you and I do every day, and it cost them their lives. How can we prevent terrorism? Will the anti-terrorism bill stop it? Probably not, but we can demand a full accounting. The American people have a right to know what really happened in Oklahoma City on April 19, 1995. If you feel there are unanswered questions, please get involved. Call or write your legislators and ask for an investigation. Bad things happen when good men do nothing.